But the retire early part for me is, a work in progress, I would say.
She thought that I was asking her to step away from her job and therefore asking her to give up her identity. And it was all like packaged up in this ball. And there was like this major resistance, like, hey man, you may want to do this and you may be sick of doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm not done yet. Two lifelong friends document and share their personal stories as they seek financial independence and to retire early. One reaches FIRE in 2020 during a global pandemic, inspiring the other to play catch up. This is Two Sides of FIRE.
What was it like when Eric brought the idea of FIRE to you? Because I believe he's the one who raised the topic. Because it's a non-traditional path. There's certainly risk in there, and there's a spectrum of risk depending upon how you manage it. But how did that resonate with you? What was your reaction like, and how did you get on board?
When he initially started talking about it, I was just like, that's
Ignore.
Cool.
That's nice.
Have fun with that.
Yeah, and then he was sort of like sending me information, and I had a lot of questions about the reality of whether or not that would actually work. Because, I think you sort of move along and you've bought into the idea that you're going to work until you're 65. And, I didn't feel like I was in a position where I was raking in huge amounts of money. And so I thought, well, that's for people who have a lot of money to do. That's not for like regular people like us to do. And so I wasn't really paying attention to some of the things he was telling me, to be honest. And I'm sure that was kind of frustrating for him.
His feelings are very hurt. You can see it right now.
Yeah.
But
one thing that happened was when COVID hit, I was working from home, and it was pretty stressful to be trying to run my lab remotely. And I was taking a lot of walks in the middle of the day to deal. And I was listening to audiobooks, and Eric had shared with me How to Quit Like a Millionaire, as well as a couple of the sort of foundation episodes of the Choose FI podcast. So I ended up listening. I think first it was the Choose FI podcast, and I think he pushed to me like, just listen to this 4% rule, because he was trying to explain how that would work, and I wasn't really buying it. And so I listened to that and started thinking about it more, and then I listened to How to Quit Like a Millionaire. And then we sat down and started going through the numbers, and I saw the numbers working. At the same time, I think we had like amounts of money that we were accumulating all of a sudden. And so we paid off our mortgage, which felt amazing. Coming from a place where, I grew up in an apartment, we never owned a house. It was like just being able to build our house and, was a huge accomplishment for me. And I never dreamed we'd have this awesome little house in the woods in Maine. And so being able to pay that off when we did was and paying off student loans too. But then, after that, you're thinking about saving for your kids' college. And so we really were thinking, and Eric before me, thinking more about like, okay, how do we move beyond just our pre-tax savings that we do anyway, like through our employers? And, what does this timeline really look like? Because eventually you are going to retire, right? And when you start thinking about what's the earliest we could do it, I was pretty shocked to see how we could move that up.
This is the way it works. Like, I present the idea to her like 4,000 times. She ignores it, decides one time that like, she's going to listen to this podcast where there's all this data and numbers. Like, she's totally data driven, and like
That's how we're trained.
No amount of data that I present is going to convince her.
Oh,
she has to find it herself. So yeah, that's how it worked. So Laura she needed a lot of convincing, like number wise. Like I had the idea about FIRE. I have to onboard her. For you, was it the same? I feel like you're less involved in the numbers just based on what Jason has told me. Is it more kind of like a conceptual idea of like, do we need to be running this rat race all the time? Or like, how important is career? How important is like balancing hobbies and life? I feel like you're someone who's like, you're sampling all these different things. So like maybe FIRE wasn't the term you used, but it seems like it was pretty easy to onboard you into the concept. Is that true?
Definitely. Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, I realized pretty early on in my career that I didn't want sort of a traditional day job. I needed change. I needed something more exciting. And then when my daughter was young, Jason started traveling a lot for work. I mean, it was probably 75% of the time. And
yeah, for a few years there.
Yeah. So that also kind of helped me realize that, it would be nice if we could find some way to work it out where he was available more for myself and for my daughter. And just, honestly, I just missed having him around. Yeah. And if there was some way that we could tweak what we were doing to make that work, and so we started those discussions pretty early on about finding a way to retire early. I wasn't aware of the FIRE movement or how any of that worked, but I'm a pretty low-key person, and I said to Jason, I think I would be happy living on a beach in St. Lucia, selling fish out of a hut. I don't have a lot of requirements.
Yeah, you did.
I'm pretty, it's nice to be comfortable, but honestly, I can pretty much live just about anywhere. And so, and then I think that's kind of when Jason sort of took it and ran, that idea and started doing the research.
How do you set a number? If like she just says, I'm happy living anywhere. Like I could live on a beach in St. Lucia and sell fish. Like how do you choose a number based on that? Because I mean, but
you're talking like 15 years ago. It was like this. It was finger to the wind.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It was not a good enough number, and it was probably, to be honest with you, a third of where we ended up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And once we started to learn, and once the resources got better, whether it's podcasts or books, and frankly just awareness, then we improved our process, and we still updated our number a number of times, just as I know you have. But yeah,
well, honestly, in the beginning, I think it was more like we were picturing ourselves like super leanFIRE. Like it would be like it would be a super leanFIRE situation. Like we didn't think that we could live the way we're living now, retired. I don't know.
It was like Mr. Money.
Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, more towards that end of things, and I think a combination of
which I was not cool with.
Just but I mean, our thought process was different early on, and I started to make opportunistic moves at work and try to level up my career, and that enabled us to think differently and frankly save differently.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we moved out to California, because we realized, okay, if we kind of up our game, and since we're both willing to make those moves while we're young, across the country, then we can make a big difference in our saving.
Yeah. So then that influenced the saving strategy then, basically. Like that
absolutely.
idea of like, okay, I want more time with you present in the family, Jason. So like make it work, guy.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I don't think that was the main push. I think it was just like, I just saw how hard Jason would. It's hard. I mean, the traveling, it was taking a toll on him. He was tired, and I just.
And you too, right? Like it's a different. It's a different life for you.
You were at home. You were at home, single parenting a lot of the time, and we had this. You would say this is going to be worth it. I'm happy to do this because it's going to enable this life for the three of us later on. But I mean, that wasn't easy.
No, it would. I don't. That's a touchy subject. I don't know how much I want to really say about that. Yes, it was difficult.
So, Laura, you talked about the process of onboarding and the realization that this was achievable, but did you feel like you had to take steps immediately? Was that something that was of your own volition? Did you guys negotiate that? What did that actually look like, that transition to now we're on the path in your eyes?
I mean, we definitely had to take steps to decide, what we needed to save and then how we were going to get that savings done. And I really needed to go through the process of I think I first accepted the financial independence part. But the retire early part for me is, a work in progress, I would say. And for me, I think I have some additional layers of, identity, and still do, caught up in what I do. So
Sure.
for me, I've been going through a process of sort of figuring out what that timeline looks like.
But she thought me asking her to get on board with this financial independence, retire early, like the FIRE thing, that I was asking her to step away from her job and therefore asking her to give up her identity. And it was all like packaged up in this ball. And there was like this major resistance, like, hey man, you may want to do this and you may be sick of doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm not done yet. And like, and I feel like we haven't really fully
That's
solved
fair
that.
enough. That's fair enough. Although when we start talking about what we want to do together, it's not compatible with my job the way it looks right now. You know, traveling around through the year is not something I can do in my current position. And also, for me, when I stop, it's not something I walk back to. You know, I could walk back to, you know, some flavor of what my expertise is in, but I'm not going to go back and like hang my lab shingle back up again. That's just not how it works.
Because you have lab animals and a research program.
Yeah, and
once
everything's funded by NIH, and you know, so people, very rarely do people actually like stop, go away, and then come back and start again.
Come back.
So, you know, so even though he wasn't necessarily saying, you know, you need to, you know, it's important that you retire soon. I think the things we were talking about made it clear to me. And then I thought, well, what if, you know, we agreed to do this together, but then he doesn't actually stop. Like he might just continue to do, you know, he's got all these interests in what we're doing right now, which is awesome. And, you know, I don't know, he might still want to continue doing that. And, you know, so for me, you know, what's the thing I'm going to do? I've always had something separate. And so, yeah, it's a different way of sort of moving forward together where we could potentially be spending all of our time together and all of our pursuits being shared, and we work very differently. So I think a lot of people are confronted with that idea when they're thinking about, you know, retiring together and then spending all of your time together. I mean, you guys Lori was probably used to you traveling all the time, so she pretty much had her way to do with the house and with your daughter, and then you would probably swoop in and be home, and then she'd be like, oh, now everything has to be different because you're here, you know, this is my space.
Yeah.
You know,
no, it's definitely like it's a shift. Yeah, when he's
How has
here
that
or
gone,
not here.
Lori?
Like having you around?
Yeah.
Well, that's a hard question to answer because it's been COVID, so that's just been like really weird because we've been like together like 100% of the time, pretty much. But I think it's been really nice having you around. I mean, like I said, we worked together at the startup early on in our careers. That's how we met. I mean, we were together like pretty much 24/7 when we were working there, so we knew that we could spend a lot of time together. I think. And also, I think we're really good at being honest with each other, too. You know, we make sure that if we're like, yeah, I just need some like alone time, like we'll just leave, you know, like we'll go for a walk or just spend a day like on our own or go up and see friends, you know, in the Bay Area or something. So,
but you might be letting me off the hook a little easy, right? I mean, you have routines and ways you like to handle, you know, the morning and, you know, how you know, get into your day. And now there's somebody who gets up hours before you sort of potentially messing with that.
You keep to yourself.
Is that always smooth sailing? Because I think I'm pretty irritated. I'm easily irritated, which means that I think I'm probably causing that for you sometimes. And we've talked about it, so I know it's happened.
Dude, I know about your vacuuming habits, man. He hates your vacuuming habits.
Dude, this guy.
He's complaining about you vacuuming.
His little like silent like bubble.
Look, don't make fun of how my brain works.
I need that too, actually. But.
He can't handle like any kind of like repetitive sounds or I mean, I knew he was a particular guy, but he's a particular guy.
Oh, so there is friction there. Yeah. Oh, it's natural.
I know what irritates him
and that's what you do.
And that's what I do. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself retired early, Lori?
That's a good question.
Well, when did you stop working full-time in science?
Yeah, I was going to say like that. Well, I mean, full-time in science was when when I had my daughter. So like 15 years ago. And then I worked part-time in science for a while and just found that wasn't with the type of research I wanted to do, that wasn't a good fit. having a young child. It's just hard to do that level of research part-time. You really need to devote a significant amount of time to that. So that's when I sort of pivoted and started doing part-time work. I started with kind of staying on the science track, like teaching science at her Montessori school. And then that kind of morphed into me starting my own tutoring business. So I've been keeping busy. I've always had kind of like little side hustles going on. So I don't know if I would consider myself retired. I mean, I'm retired from science, I guess, like retired from biotech is the way I would think about it, maybe, but not fully retired, no, because I keep pretty busy.
I think a lot of us were sort of raised on this traditional idea of what retirement means. And I think, you know, what we're doing now is redefining that in many ways. So, you know, I think, and when we talk to other people who about this topic, they will be like, well, what are you going to do? What do you mean you're going to retire? Like somehow like you're morally corrupt because you're going to retire early.
Must be nice.
Rather than thinking like, you know, oh, so what are you going to do next? Right? Like it's a positive thing because now, I mean, obviously we're not the kind of people who are going to just, you know, watch Price is Right at 11 o'clock every day. And I mean, maybe for a few months I'll do that.
I mean, I want to ask you about the day drinking because I'm like really into the day drinking.
You asked me. You asked me about day drinking in a previous episode.
I know it's on my mind, man. It's on my mind.
You're really concerned. So, Eric, how much day drinking do you think you're going to do, and how much does it concern you versus excite you?
Come on, I know you're lying about the day drinking. I know you do it.
No, he's. I've been keeping an eye on him.
I'm pretty good. Like once every 2 weeks, we'll go visit a couple wineries on a weekday. But I mean, that's how our schedules work. She tutors and doesn't tutor every day, and she works at the brewery one day a week. So there's always a weekday or two where we could go do that if we wanted.
And it's better to go during the week anyway.
Yeah.
Crowds, well, I think the other important thing about this sort of reframing what retirement is just this disconnect now. We're disconnecting, you know, your occupation or how you're using your time with making money, because making money is no longer the driving factor. So you don't have to necessarily take a job where you're traveling 75% of your time around the world because you're trying to maximize your earning potential. You can do something that you just 100% enjoy. So all of the things that you do that are sort of like, oh, this is just part of it. I have to do these things because it's part of what I do. You can just jettison those things and then strip it down to just the stuff that you care about and the things that motivate you intrinsically. And so I think those are like the most attractive things about this whole idea.
Well, are you saying that like you're jettisoning some of those things now in your current job?
Of course not.
Because I was going to say, Laura, you're writing the playbook right now. You're ready to retire early. That's all I'm hearing from you. You articulated it better than I would.
It's just so hard to use that word retired too.
I usually drop air quotes on it.
It's such a loaded word, especially using it with people who just aren't a part of the movement or older people. There's so many assumptions and so much like baggage with that word that it's I don't know. For me, it's more I'm just at a point in my life where I can choose to do whatever I want to do. Like I like the job I have at the brewery, you know, like I would do that for free, like even if they didn't want to pay me, like just because it's fun. It's awesome. I'm learning stuff. I get to go in there. I get to do some molecular biology one day a week, and that's perfect. And so that's how I choose how I spend my time now. I keep busy, but I make sure I keep busy with things that, you know, if it's a paid situation, things that I would do for free. I don't want to feel pressured.
What if they didn't give you the free beer?
I would still do it.
Oh, yeah. I think you would actually.
I would. Yeah. Just because the science is the big draw for me, but the free beer is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty great.
So entering FI, since we'll forget the RE part of it. So now that you're financially independent, like what's changed for you, Lorri?
For me?
Yeah.
You know, I'm actually, I was just thinking about this earlier when we were talking. Like, I think I was actually in a very good position and very fortunate in that I was able to sort of ease into FI because of Jason's role, you know, with him being away and traveling so much and earning so well for our family. Once my daughter entered middle school, I had like a couple of years to start doing this, to kind of play around, to start the tutoring business. So I was able to kind of ease into it, where I don't think a lot of people get to do that. So it's almost like I had a 2 or 3 year head start. So not a ton has changed for me, actually, since we've officially reached FI.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about since I stopped working?
So before we reached FI, I'm thinking food, like just a lot of like impulse buys. I'd be like, we used to shop at like Whole Foods, and I'd be like, I'll just buy this here, this like, $20 item there. It was like, I didn't even like think about that stuff. And now I definitely keep that in mind. I'm watching the budget a lot more. I think you just, it kind of reminds me of being back to when I was in college. College, like early working days.
Oh, thanks, man.
It's like,
yeah, you're really screwing me over here. That's exactly what Laura does not want to hear that. So, all right, why don't you step out now?
I think no.
You're done.
Do you feel like your purchases? Do you feel like your purchasing is micromanaged?
No, I don't feel like that. I just mean that I'm thinking about.
You're more thoughtful.
I'm more thoughtful about how I spend now.
Is he like pinching you under the table there?
Yeah. He's like,
I'm seeing the same number of handbags and shoes being purchased that were being purchased when I was at my peak of earning. So
yeah,
that's in the budget.
We're not living off of like boxed falafel and ramen and like, rice-a-roni like we did in college. It's not like that, but it's just having to think about things, right? I mean, when you start making like a decent income, right, you just kind of gradually start spending more. You just stop thinking about spending, and I think you just don't realize how much you're doing that until, you have to think about it.
Yeah.
And then I was like,
well, it's kind of interesting because we were talking about this the other night, and if you had started that mindset sooner, then, we would be on a much different timeline, if we, thought about that. But there was definitely a period of time in our lives, like after we had saved for the house and we were kind of saving for the kids' college, but we were not paying attention to what we were buying at the grocery store necessarily. And I think that the only other time where we were really careful about budget was like right when Eric started his business. We were really keeping our eyes on it. But then after that, once things started to become more comfortable for us, we stopped really paying close tabs on our budget. And I think that in retrospect, if I could go back and change something, it would probably be to, maybe start. I wish that Eric had gotten me thinking about this sooner, because I don't think I would have come to it on my own. I think I would have just done the typical, like, keep your head down and work until you're 65 and spend money on all kinds of things that you don't need. We would just have a house full of stuff, and then we'd probably have a bigger house full of stuff. So I'm glad that we have gone down this path. I think it's been kind of a game changer, at least for both of us, I think. And then when we talk to our family about it too, I think it's been an interesting evolution of how our family has received these ideas too. My mother is 74. She's worked her whole life. And there's a lot of, out of necessity, of course, but also just that's what you do. Like,
she's still working.
Be a good citizen. You're giving back. Like, this is what you do. There's a lot of honor in this. And I also feel guilty because maybe my mom is still working because financially she really has to. So isn't it selfish of me? Like, here I am, this professional doing really well, and I'm just going to make this somewhat selfish decision. Like, what if my mom or Eric's parents or other people in my family need help? And, here we are just sort of like giving up our income.
At the highest, at our peak earnings.
Yeah. So that part is hard for me, but I spent a lot of time thinking and worrying about that and talking to various people. And eventually I started talking to my mom about it. And at first she was like, oh, but she didn't necessarily say congratulations right away. I didn't talk about numbers, so I think she didn't
believe it,
respond to it the way that I expected her to. And then the second time I talked to her about it, I started just mentioning some numbers. And then it was when I said that we had already saved for the kids' education, at least the amount that we wanted to contribute to their education. She was like, you have? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's all part of it. Like, that's why we're talking about this now. And she's like, that's amazing. Congratulations. And all of a sudden it was like she was having the response that I expected her to have in the first place. So I think it was, I don't know, it just took time, I think, for her to understand where I was coming from.
And you told your sister, and your sister was just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I think they
cool.
were
and that's what my sister was like too.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
It's like we're building this up in our mind like it's going to be a big deal because we're thinking like, oh, we're about to make this like gigantic life change, and isn't everyone else going to consider it with the same level of importance as we do? And they're just like,
why should they
Right.
though?
well, no, exactly. No, it's like completely insane for me to have thought that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, given how much you and I have talked about it, Jay, like it's a big part of our lives, right? And for you guys now, you've transitioned onto that, and hopefully you've left all that headspace behind. Although I kind of stir it up every week with you, but it's just kind of like part of your operating system, you know. And for us, we're just getting onboarded into it, and we're dedicating a big portion of everything we bring in to say, okay, this is like forced scarcity in our life. Like we don't make any of those big pots of money available anymore. They just all get invested. They all have a job, you know, whereas before we would have had a boat by now. I can guarantee it. We would have had 4 kayaks. We would have had
I mean, we definitely have friends who have
they're doing it.
Gone and done all of those things.
Yeah, lifestyle expansion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. No, and I think part of what, you know, maybe without using these words, what I was thinking about when Lori was talking was, maybe you did the same thing. We had a strategy of kind of paying ourselves first, right? We made sure we hit all our savings targets, and there's forced scarcity built into those. But then there was, after we did all of that, took care of all our obligations, there was the money remaining that we spent. And we never discussed budget because I had already built in kind of our existing saving habits into that model. And so it wasn't something we were actively talking about until about a year before a year before I left work, when we started testing the model. We started living on that budget, this very same budget that we live on now. And then we started to talk about it more. So it was a bit of a shift, and we hadn't done that before. So maybe to your point, Laura, had we started having that kind of discussion, kind of flipped around our saving versus spending discussions, not even necessarily what we were doing, but even just how we talked about it, that might make it a more comfortable transition. So if that's any kind of guidance, I would put that out there.
Yeah, I do think that a lot of partners, you know, it's hard to talk about money and budgets, right? Because ultimately there are going to be some things that you disagree about in terms of what you think you want to, when it comes to spending and saving. How much money do you want to have on hand? What do you want to do with it? And I know many people who like avoid the topic altogether because it does end out with, you know, creating a lot of friction between people. So I appreciate actually how much we've been talking about this over the past, 3 years. I mean, before that we had talked about it at important landmarks in our life, but now we meet and talk about our savings and our budget. I think once a month for sure, we sit down in front of the spreadsheets and go over all the numbers. And, you know, I think that's a big difference for us. And it actually makes it easier, right? So when we're disagreeing about what we're spending our money on, it's not so fraught with emotion anymore because we're talking about it so often.
Yeah, I guess.
So I guess if other people are running into issues in terms of addressing these things with their partner, all I can say is the more you talk about it, the better.
I mean, we have definite shared financial responsibilities. Like Laura pays the bills, I do the investments. You know, we share the kind of budgeting look backs for the FI stuff. How does it work in your house?
Tell us, Lori.
Yeah, I kind of got kicked off the bills. A while ago.
20 years ago.
20 years ago.